Good evening, everybody. Thank you again for joining our 11th series of lecture series by Mumbai Surgical Society. And today we have three eminent speakers and two chairpersons who will be chairing the sessions. And the talk for today is head neck surgeries. Topics are always well versed, and we have already shown the topics. Before we start the program and introduce the chairpersons, I would like Dr. Niranjan Agarwal to say a few words and then we'll start. Dr. Niranjan Agarwal.
Good evening, everyone. A formal welcome to all of you. Like every week, you have to hear my voice. Soon it will become like that radio jockey. शाम को 9 बजे Friday को निरंजन अग्रवाल की आवाज सुनने का. So, welcome to the 11th series. Today we are discussing the head neck cancers over here. And as Rajesh said, there are eminent people talking on the same and equally eminent chairpersons to chair the sessions for you. This is the 11th series, and next week we'll be starting with the esophagus, and down after that stomach, the GI tract will start. So before coming too much into your way, thank you Juventus for providing the platform again, and thank you for people who regularly and very religiously join this program. Especially seniors like Dr. Anant Ram. There is Dr. Jayant Jhala, Dr. Hemant Pikle, whom I regularly see, and they are regularly attending like we are attending it. So this is definitely liked by people who are attending it, and I must thank them because it is their interest and they are the ones who push us to continue doing this. So thank you once again, and Rajesh, please introduce the chairperson so that we can move forward.
Thank you, Niranjan. So we start our session. Our first chairperson for today is Dr. Satish Kamath. He is an oncosurgeon at Asha Cancer Care Hospital and Children's First Hospital. Dr. Satish is quite a oncosurgeon, and Dr. Satish has many papers and publications to his credit. He has authored few books also. So that's Dr. Satish Kamath for you. And our second chairperson is Dr. Priya Ahire. Dr. Priya Ahire is Associate Professor in General Surgery, Grand Medical College and Sir JJ Group of Hospital. Dr. Priya has been keen interest in laparoscopic surgery, and she has quite a few publications and paper to her credit. Over to Dr. Priya and Dr. Kamath to take over the proceedings.
Thank you, Mumbai Surgical Association, Dr. Niranjan and Dr. Rajesh, for having this wonderful session every Friday. And thank you for inviting me as a chairperson for this very important topic. So without much ado, we'll start the session. I first invite Dr. Kannan S., who is the head and neck and a skull-based surgeon at Apollo Hospital, Chennai. He will be he has very special interest in skull-based surgery, and he's going to talk on a very, very difficult topic, carcinoma of unknown primary. So let's have pearls of wisdom from him. Dr. Kannan, please.
Thank you, sir. Thanks to Mumbai Surgical Society for having me here. And thanks to Dr. Rakesh, Dr. Niranjan for this
And then you have to speak a bit loud.
Yeah.
Or maybe you can come closer to your laptop. I think you remove the earphone, that itself will increase the voice. If you're comfortable. Yeah. Sometimes the volume goes down because of that.
Sure, sir.
Yeah. Dr. Kannan, please speak so that we can.
Yeah, okay. So I'm just sharing my screen.
Yeah, this is nice. We can hear you very well now.
Yeah, great. So I'll just make it full screen and then we'll go. Good evening, everyone. So carcinoma of unknown primary. What is carcinoma of unknown primary? So you have a neck node. You have a neck node which is FNAC or histopathology proven. But there is no history of any previous malignancy. The patient doesn't give you any symptoms of any primary tumor, any malignancy anywhere in the upper aerodigestive tract or anywhere in the skin or anywhere in the salivary glands. Your imaging, CT scan, PET scan doesn't show you any tumor anywhere in the upper aerodigestive tract. But you have a neck node and that is positive for malignancy. With this, how do we proceed? This is quite rare tumor. Almost about only 3 to 5% of the head and neck cancers. Most commonest FNAC is squamous cell carcinoma. We also do get adenocarcinoma, poorly differentiated tumors when the node is in the lower level. The most commonest level is level 2. It is usually unilateral. Very rarely 10% you can have an unknown primary bilateral nodes. Usually they present with multiple nodes. So as I've told you, jugulodigastric is the most commonest area, and 80% of the jugulodigastric unknown primary will be squamous cell carcinoma. Lower jugulodigastric is quite uncommon. If it is in the lower part of the neck, it is 40% of the times it could be adenocarcinoma. Submental nodes are quite rare. Jugulodigastric node is quite common. So what is why do the secondary neck alone persist and you don't see the primary? This could be because of various reasons. The primary might have regressed because of immunological things, or the primary tumor attains metastatic capacity quite early and it regresses. It could be an epithelial cell rest which is present in the branchial cleft, which from where the squamous cell carcinoma might arise. Or inside a node or inside the neck, you'll have the epithelial cell rest, which can become a squamous cell carcinoma. It could be clonal expansion or clonal variability. So because of this variability, the primary nodes get suppressed and the neck node increases in size. And you might have an infraclavicular primary, which we couldn't detect by the techniques which we have. Every node drains a particular area. So this is a key in managing secondary neck. For example, we have a submental node, submandibular node. We have upper jugulodigastric node, level 2, middle jugulodigastric node, level 3, lower jugulodigastric node, level 4. Then we have level 5 nodes. We have low level supraclavicular nodes. So we should know what areas these nodes drain, so that when we have a node here, we have to examine that area. For example, if you have a node in submental area, level 1A, you should look for the primary in the chin. You should look for the primary in the lower lip, floor of the mouth, in the mandible at the level of the incisors, at the level of the tip of the tongue. If you have a neck node in level 1B, you have to look for the tumor in the buccal mucosa, floor of the mouth, rarely tongue and nasal cavity, sometimes in the skin of the face. Level 2, which is the most commonest site. As you see, it drains major part of the head and neck. It drains the nasopharynx, oropharynx, hypopharynx. The tongue also drains into level 2. So whenever you have a level 2 node, which is positive for squamous cell carcinoma, there are various sites from which the tumor can arise. If you don't know the exact site, then you have to treat the entire area. So you think if you radiate the nasopharynx, oropharynx, hypopharynx, the morbidity would be quite high. So locating the node is quite critical. Locating the primary is quite critical. If you could identify the primary, then you can treat it adequately. Or at least you should know from where this primary could have most probably arisen. For example, if you have EBV positive in the node, that means the tumor might have arisen from the nasopharynx. If you have HPV positive, then you know that it could have arisen from the oropharynx. So you can treat that area alone, you can spare the rest of the areas so that the morbidity will decrease. Similarly, if there is level 3, it is usually from the hypopharynx. Rarely it can arise from nasopharynx or oropharynx, or from oral cavity, it usually comes to level 2, then it comes to level 3. Hypopharynx, level 4. Level 4, if the low level 4 can arise from infraclavicular primary, but usually it is from thyroid, cervical esophagus, lower part of hypopharynx. Level 5 is from the nasopharynx, oropharynx, or from the scalp or the neck. Level 6 is usually thyroid. They are paratracheal nodes. It can arise from the pyriform apex. It can arise from cervical esophagus or from subglottic tumors. So now we all know where to look for whenever we have a node. So to summarize, if you have a node in the submental area, look in the floor of the mouth, lower lip, and in the gum. If you have a node in the submandibular area, look in the nose, paranasal sinus, particularly buccal mucosa, or it could be from the submandibular gland per se. If you have a node in the level 2, which is quite common, look in the nasopharynx, oropharynx, hypopharynx, tongue, and supraglottis. If you have a node in the level 3, look in the thyroid, hypopharynx, esophagus. Level 4, look for intra-abdominal tumors, breast, lung, esophagus. Posterior triangle nodes are usually from the nasopharynx and thyroid. If it is in the lower level, if it is in the supraclavicular area, then it could be from the lung or breast. So these are all, the adenocarcinoma is quite rare. If it occurs, it's usually from the salivary gland or from the thyroid in the neck. If it occurs in the lower level of the neck, it could be from the breast, prostate, colon, lung, and esophagus. So if your diagnosis is adenocarcinoma, you have to look in these areas. So as I've told you before, history is quite critical. Depending on the node, ask for the history. For example, if you have a level 2 node, ask for change of voice, ask for dysphagia, hemoptysis, ask for nasal problems, autalgia, which is deferred pain. You should also look for weight loss and other symptoms. History is quite critical. Tobacco smokers will have P53 related mutation. People who have multiple sex partners will have HPV related problems. People who have exposure to wood dust, people who are ethnically from northeastern part of a country, they have increased propensity for nasopharyngeal carcinomas. So history is quite critical in locating the site of primary and treating them accordingly. Clinical examination. You should know the number of nodes, check for the mobility site, whether there is contralateral nodes present or not, look for the primary. A thorough examination is important. Whenever there is low level primaries, thorough breast examination, lung and others needs to be examined well. All the patients with secondary SNEC with unknown primary should have a proper ENT examination. Do a nasopharyngoscopy, look for the base tongue, look for the nasopharynx, look for the tonsils. These are all the hidden areas. Look for the postcricoid and piriform sinus. What should you look there? You should look for a whitish patch or a reddish patch, leukoplakia or erythroleukoplakia. Whenever you see an ulcer or a leukoplakic patch, gently tease it with the flexible scope. If it is bleeding, that is the most common site of the malignancy. When you look at the piriform sinus, look for the pooling of saliva. That would suggest a malignancy in the cricopharynx or in the cervical esophagus. If there is any asymmetry between the both sides of the oropharynx, that area needs to be biopsied. So carefully scope these patients and pay attention to those following points which I have told you. So now, whenever you have a neck node, you should know how to stage them. The neck nodal staging is common for everyone. One, there is no N0, there is no nodes. You have a 3 centimeter node on the same side, which is mobile, it is N1. If you have a node which is about 3 to 6 centimeter in the single node, it is N2A. If you have multiple nodes on the same side, less than 6 centimeters, N2B. If you have a node on the contralateral side or bilateral side or bilateral, then it is N2C. Node more than 6 centimeters is N3. So with this, the metastasis of unknown origin, the nodal can be classified as N1 to N3, and depending on the metastasis, if it is M1 or M0. So the first investigation of choice is fine needle aspiration cytology. With an experienced pathologist, they will tell you whether we are dealing with malignancy or whether we are dealing with inflammatory lesions. That is quite important. FNAC up to 98 to 99% sensitive in detecting malignancy from differentiating malignancy from inflammatory diseases. But the problem arises, most of the pathologists would easily find out squamous cell carcinoma. The problem comes when the lesion is poorly differentiated or the aspirate is lymphatic. Then you need to do flow cytometry, IHC, and other things. Biopsy we tend to avoid. I'll tell you about it further. So biopsy is needed when you suspect lymphoma or when there is infraclavicular primary where you have to do further testings like immunohistochemistry and other stuffs to locate the primary. Open biopsy. Open biopsy tend to increase the chance of local recurrence and distant metastasis if you don't radiate these patients. So as much as possible, we tend to avoid open biopsy. What happens is the lymphatic pattern changes once you do an open biopsy. If at all you have to do an open biopsy, plan your neck incision. See to that the scar is excised when you do a neck dissection. So instead of open biopsies, we would prefer to do a true cut biopsy or a core needle biopsy. The core needle biopsy will help us in locating the primary. For example, if we have a cystic node in a young patient with multiple sexual partners, we will do a HPV markers like P16. We look for the DNA of the HPV virus in the sample. For nasopharynx, we look for EBV test. We do a EBV immunohistochemistry, which would locate us that the tumor is in the nasopharynx. If you suspect infraclavicular primaries, we do TFF, which is present both in lung and thyroid. So if now, then we would do a thyroglobulin. If TFF is positive and thyroglobulin is negative, then the primary is from the lung. If both TFF and thyroglobulin is positive, then the primary is from the thyroid. So immunohistochemistry from these, there are few centers where they do immunohistochemistry from FNAC styles, but it is always preferable to do an immunohistochemistry from a core biopsy or a true cut biopsy. And this immunohistochemistry is particularly useful and particularly needed when the FNAC report is undifferentiated or poorly differentiated. So we have to look for medullary carcinoma or thyroid, papillary CA thyroid. Pap CA thyroid, thyroglobulin will be positive. Medullary CA thyroid, calcitonin will be positive. So similarly, other markers will be positive depending upon the immunohistochemistry results. So with this, we would be able to know what is the primary with which we are dealing with. Usually patients come to us when they reach us, they come with a CT scan or an MRI, which would be sufficient to know the number of nodes which is positive, whether the node has invading the surrounding structures or not, and it would also give us a fair idea about the primary sites. But more than this, PET scan is a game changer in in occult primaries. Whenever you have a node and you couldn't detect the primary by routine imaging like CT scan, MRI, and by your routine endoscopies, if you couldn't locate a primary, definitely do a PET scan. PET scan will tell you it will help you in detecting the primary to a certain extent, and the other advantage, it will also detect the metastasis. So, but even if you have a normal PET scan, you should carefully do a pan endoscopy and do a targeted biopsy, because PET scan will pick up the primary which is more than 1 centimeter in size. If the size of the primary is less than 1 centimeter, then the PET scan would not pick it up. So your examination and clinical suspicion is quite critical. So the other advantages of PET scanners for the radiation oncologists, they can use it to target their volume. They can plan their fractionation depending upon the PET uptake in the lesions. So it will help them in a big way. Similarly, we analyzed our results when we were in Tata Hospital. So what we found out was in almost 35 to 40% of our patients, PET scan changed the treatment modality. In more than 20%, it detected the distant metastasis, which weren't found out by other techniques. So the patient straight went for a palliative intent. In more than 20 to 30%, it detected the primary, which were not detected before. So the radiation and everything became targeted. So PET scan is quite useful. After FNAC, the next investigation of choice for secondary SNEC with unknown primary is PET scan. So after PET scan or before PET scan, do a pan endoscopy, but do a biopsy of the primary site only after a PET scan, because it would alter the imaging thing. So always do a pan endoscopy. When you do a pan endoscopy, look at the base of the tongue, look at the nasopharynx, look behind the fossa of Rosen, look at the fossa of Rosenmuller behind the torus tuberalis, and look at the hypopharynx, particularly the piriform apex and in the postcricoid area. So pan endoscopy will help you to pick up a lot of nodes. So now, if you have done a PET scan, you have done an FNAC, you are not able to detect a primary, and you are dealing with a squamous cell carcinoma. provided if you have a cystic nodal metastasis, if it is HPV positive, now we would recommend a tonsillectomy, and there are quite a significant number of centers who do a base term mucosectomy, that is lingual tonsillectomy. They remove the palatine tonsil, they remove the they remove the base term tonsil or the lingual tonsil. If it is positive, then the primary is from the oropharynx, then you can just treat the oropharynx, spare the other structures, and the toxicity would become grossly less. If while doing a transoral robotic surgery, if we find if we find a lesion on frozen, you can do a wide excision of that area and then follow these patients on regular basis and treat them accordingly. So do a palatine tonsillectomy and tongue-based mucosectomy if you suspect oropharyngeal primary, particularly in HPV positive patients when you have a cystic nodal metastasis. So now we have seen how to reach up to a particular site of primary. If we couldn't reach up to a particular site of primary, how do we treat them? So now you have to classify them as N1 to N3 nodes. N1 nodes, single modality treatment. Either you treat either they can be treated with surgery or with radiotherapy. We prefer to do surgery for the following reasons, I'll tell you. And even if you treat them with radiotherapy, 80% of N2A and N1 nodes will be cured. For N1 nodes, if you do surgery, more than 20% of them will get upstaged and they become N2, and accordingly you can treat them with radiotherapy. Some of the patients clinically they might not have extracapsular extension. If following surgery you could find out extracapsular extension, so which would warrant chemoradiation. So surgery would upgrade the disease. Similarly, if you have N2, N3 nodes, it's always preferable to do surgery followed by radiotherapy, stroke chemoradiotherapy. So how much neck dissection should we do? Usually it is better to do a comprehensive neck dissection, clear from level 1 to 5. If you suspect primary is from the oropharynx, if it is HPV positive, then level 1 can be avoided. Plan your incision accordingly. For example, if you have a tumor in the hypopharynx, if you suspect a tumor in the hypopharynx, take an hockey stick incision. Because if in the later stage, if you develop a primary in the pyriform sinus, or if you develop primary in the supraglottis, which would need a total laryngectomy, then you can convert this into a Lux Sorensen's incision. If there is a primary in the oropharynx, which would need a commando procedure, then take an horizontal skin crease incision. So plan your incision well. Extent of neck dissection would usually better to do 1 to 5. If it is oropharyngeal, you can avoid level 1. So when you have only level 1 node without extracapsular extension, radiation can be avoided and these patients can be closely followed up. But we very rarely do this. Radiotherapy. Radiotherapy plays an important role in the management of secondary SNEC with unknown primary. And there are a lot of things which is needed in the radiotherapy which needs to be understood. So following surgery, we would know the number of nodes positive. Accordingly, we can radiate the neck and radiate the primary site. So whether we are radiating the primary sites, like for example, if we have a level 2, level 3 node, whether we should radiate the nasopharynx, oropharynx, hypopharynx is the most important thing. If you radiate the entire nasopharynx, oropharynx, hypopharynx, patient will have serious radiotherapy related problems. So what people do is they radiate the ipsilateral site. So now whenever you give ipsilateral radiotherapy, how do we go about? If there is no primary surgery for the neck node, we would treat them with 70 grays. If we have done the surgery for the neck, then treat them with 50 to 60 grays of radiotherapy, and the primary site from where the tumor might have arisen, like oropharynx and hypopharynx, would be treated with 50 to 60 grays. So ipsilateral radiation, but comprehensive radiation. So you radiate bilateral neck, you radiate the entire sites from where the primary could have arisen. By treating this, the chance of recurrence is quite low. The chance of lesion, the chance of primary coming out is quite low. The tumor control is quite high, but the morbidity is also increases. So whenever you treat the patient with comprehensive RT, that means you radiate bilateral neck, you radiate the entire sites from where the tumor might have arisen, like oropharynx, hypopharynx, then better to treat them with IMRT. The advantage of IMRT is you can spare the salivary glands. You can treat only the areas from areas where you need to treat. So once you avoid the salivary glands, the salivary secretions is better, and the patient's swallowing and the xerostomia related problems comes down grossly. Similarly, you can also avoid the dysphagia related structures like on the superior constrictor, inferior constrictor on the opposite side can be avoided to some extent, so that the radiation related morbidity will decrease. So when you compare between unilateral versus contralateral, the chance of disease emergence, the chance of primary emergence at a later stage is very less with comprehensive radiotherapy. The local control is better with comprehensive radiotherapy, but there is no difference in disease-free survival or overall survival. So unilateral RT for less favorable groups when the disease burden is less, comprehensive radiotherapy when the disease burden is more. So whenever you have N2B, N3 node, do a comprehensive neck dissection. Treat these patients with comprehensive radiotherapy. With this, the nodal control is much better. The overall survival and disease-free survival are also much better. So similarly, we would avoid radiating nasopharynx unless the biopsy or the FNAC is lymphoepithelioma or the EBV markers are positive. If EBV markers are negative, the nasopharynx can be safely avoided during radiotherapy. And we also look into the ethnicity. People from northeastern part of the country, is better to include the nasopharynx in the field. If the neck is, if you do the surgery alone and if you don't radiate the neck, the chance of primary coming back is more than 25%, and the chance of nodal recurrence ipsilateral and contralateral is quite high. So unless for very small neck nodes, always radiate the neck after surgery. Whether to give chemotherapy or not, we usually follow the general guidelines for all head and neck cancers. We give chemotherapy when there is extracapsular extension, when there is margin positive. Similarly, following neck dissection, if there is extracapsular extension, add chemotherapy to these patients, they will definitely do well. So to conclude, surgery followed by comprehensive radiotherapy is better than radiotherapy alone or ipsilateral RT alone, but this treatment is quite toxic. So we would reserve it for bulky nodes, high-grade tumors, and bilateral neck nodes. Whenever we radiate, you should preferably radiate them with IMRT so that you can spare the salivary glands. When chemotherapy is added when there is extracapsular extension. So there is no gross RCTs in this area. So as of now, comprehensive radiation using IMRT, add chemotherapy when there is extracapsular extension. Thank you.
Dr. Kannan, I think that was an excellent comprehensive talk. There are no questions on the chat box, but how useful is PET scan?
So PET scan, you definitely do it whenever you have a patient with secondary SNEC with unknown primary. When the FNAC is positive and you couldn't locate a primary, definitely do a PET scan. It would help you in identifying primaries in more than 20% of the patients. And other advantages in around 10 to 15%, it will detect distant metastasis so that your treatment intent will change. You would not go for a curative intent, you'll go for a palliative intent. So it would change your treatment management in 20 to 40% of your patients.
Will it omit pan endoscopy?
Pan endoscopy is must. That's what I told you.
Okay.
PET scan will never pick up any lesion which is less than 1 centimeter. So if you do a pan endoscopy, you target those areas, that is must. So both are counter protective. You can't replace one with another.
What is pan endoscopy? One person has asked.
Okay, what is pan endoscopy? So you do a nasal endoscopy, you do a flexible laryngoscopy, and if there is a low level nodes, you also do a esophagoscopy and bronchoscopy. So on all patients, we would do a nasal endoscopy, we would do a hypopharyngoscopy. But the esophagoscopy and bronchoscopy will depend upon the level of the node.
Thank you, Dr. Kannan. I think there are no more questions at the moment. If anyone will tackle them later on. Dr. Priya?
Yes, sir. I'll next invite Dr. Rakesh Katna Dr. Rakesh Katna is an head and neck face surgical oncology consultant at various hospitals in Mumbai, like Jaslok Hospital, Bombay Hospital, and Lilavati Hospital. He is a trained at world-renowned oncology center. He has many national and international publications to his credit. I'll welcome Dr. Rakesh Katna. Over to you, sir.
Uh, Hello. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Priya. Thank you for the introduction. And thanks to the organizers of the MSS, that the Mumbai Surgical Society, Dr. Niranjan and Dr. Rajesh, and other office bearer. Dr. Kannan, who has covered very comprehensively and very good talk for the very vague topic, which is not routinely seen, the carcinoma of unknown primary. From that, now I'll come to the routinely seen, very frequent in our Indian setup, that is the oral cancers, and how to go ahead with the management of these oral tumors. So as we know, in burden, when we see in India, top cancers in India, head and neck forms almost like 30% of the cancer load in the country, while oral cancers, mouth and tongue specifically, constitute almost a 25% or 1/4 of all tumors. And the sad part of this thing is it's a leading cause of cancer in Indian males, and majority of our patients, almost like 60%, they present in the locally advanced stages. So when we see the site distribution in India vis-a-vis versus the Western population, we see that majority, almost like 60% of our patients having gingivobuccal tumors, as compared to the Western side where the tongue and floor of mouth cancers are most prevalent. And the reason for that is tobacco chewing habits, especially the smokeless tobacco, supari, betel nut, quid. That is the reason for having this propensity for this site distribution. And these two tumors, gingivobuccal and tongue cancers, are generally biological different, which we'll see in later how to manage that stage wise also. But if you see briefly here, that stage, generally gingivobuccal tumors present in advanced stage because they're not associated with pain initially. Patient come with late presentations. While in tongue, almost like 40% patients with respect to the pain at the initial area, they come in the early stages. Despite coming in the early stages, still the tongue cancers have a high propensity of the neck node metastasis as compared to gingivobuccal cancers. And as we know, the first nodal station or the involvement of the nodes, more commonly level 1 nodes involved in gingivobuccal tumors, while more level 2 or level 3 are involved in the tongue cancers. And patterns of failure also, gingivobuccal tumors fail at the local site as compared to neck or the distant metastasis, which is more commonly seen in the tongue cancers. The mantra for like in all cancers here in head and neck also is same, that yes, early detection saves lives. So when we compare the 5-year survival for the localized disease as well as advanced disease, the difference comes out to 76 to 80% for early disease as compared to almost half of the rate, that is 40 to 50% in the advanced tumors. So what we know till now and what we'll be discussing, that is the treatment principles and algorithms, management of the node positive neck, utility of the microvascular reconstructions. So when we talk about the management, the goals are, first one is to eradicate the cancer, prioritize. Second one is to preserve or the restore the form of the function, then to minimize the sequelae and the morbidity of the treatment and prevent any further recurrences, new primary cancers or disease. Staging is very important because the implication of staging is with respect to your prognosis also. So when it's early stage tumor like stage 1 and 2, as we have seen, the excellent chances of cure over 80%, while advanced stages like 3, 4 and 4B, the tumor cure rate drops down to almost 50%, while it's a very poor prognosis when it's a stage 4C, which is metastatic disease. Management of these tumors require a plethora of other people also, apart from the main people who are the helm of affairs like the surgeon and radiotherapy oncologist and a medical oncologist, along with the help of very important that plastic surgery reconstruction, which has taken in, precedence in very important part in the last few decades, along with your dental rehabilitation, physiotherapy, and the palliative therapy. So we have to optimize along these 4 treatment modalities. Generally, we had traditionally surgery, radiation, and chemo. Now with the advent of the targeted chemotherapy or the immunotherapy, these all have its own advantages and limitations, but these optimization and underplay between these 4 modalities generally forms the crux for the treatment of these tumors. So let's start with the first, that's potentially malignant tumors, because they have the potential to turn into malignant diseases, and treatment at early stage cures this thing. And it's very common in our Indian Southeastern Asian population with respect to various tobacco eating habits also. So these conditions generally are called as potentially malignant because they can turn into malignancy, though low risk, but yes, they have a potential to turn into a malignant disorder anytime. So it's like leukoplakia, that is the first homogeneous leukoplakias, which are very common, can be kept under observation until unless only if the leukoplakia is on the tongue, it should be excised, or on the palate, or more than 2 centimeter. Then we sometimes see these non-homogeneous verrucous kind of lesions. These should be treated as early as possible because they have a higher chances of turning into malignancy as compared to homogeneous ones. Then proliferative verrucous leukoplakia, which is common in the lip area and other oral sites. This also have a high propensity to convert into verrucous carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma. So they also should be treated as early as possible. Then very common erythroplakia, which has a very high malignant transformation rate, almost 50 to 80%. These are the red patches along with or without white speckled patches. So none of the erythroplakia should be left untreated because of high transformation rate into the malignancy. Then other conditions, because of eating of supari and pan, the soral submucous fibrosis and lichen planus also puts the patient at higher risk of developing a subsequent malignancy. So why to treat them? Because they can harbor malignancy, like especially in the erythroplakia and proliferative verrucous leukoplakias. They have a potential of 1 to 7% over a period of long duration, 7 years, to turn into a malignancy. And treatment at this stage potentially cures the disease. So now looking at the oral cancers, we know that tobacco is the most common reason in almost more than 85% of all head and neck cancers. Let's start with the imaging. I'm not going into the details of imaging, but just to cover up that CT scan is the generally preferred modality in oral cancers, buccal mucosa especially, and MRI is preferred in carcinoma tongue. Whenever we want a soft tissue extension or the extrinsic muscle involvement or perineural invasion, MRI is preferred over the CT scan. And when you want to rule out bone involvement in advanced tongue cancers, you can add few cuts of the CT scan along with the MRI to complete the examination. So generally, we do this imaging to see for the primary extent of the tumor, bone involvement, posterior extension of the disease, and neck metastasis as well. Sonography can be done in very early tumor like T1 stage tumors where you don't need to do CT or MRI and the anterior based lesions. PET scan doesn't have any role in initial T1, T2 lesions, but is used in T3, T4 advanced malignancies, or specifically in the where the low level nodes like level 3, level 4 nodes are there, or level 5, N3 large nodes, or we have a recurrent or a residual disease setting and you have a strong suspicion of the metastasis as well. So early oral cancers, they are treated because they have a good control and survival rates. A single modality is used generally in the form of surgery or radiation therapy. So among these, what to use? So tumor removal is still a priority. As we know, functional aspect is paramount and better cosmesis as the changes are happening. So in stage 1 and stage 2, surgery is a treatment of choice. But when we compare with respect to the historical data and other publications, there's no randomized control trial because there's no need, but there is a lot of plethora of studies which says that whenever surgery and radiation in early stages has been compared, they're almost equal, with surgery a little better. But what tips the balance? So when we look at the surgery, it's a simple, short, cost-effective treatment, no major functional or cosmetic morbidity in early cancers, can be repeated multiple times, suitable for the lesions which are close to the bone, and it keeps radiation as a reserve for the second primary or the subsequent any recurrences. While if we see the radiotherapy, it's a prolonged treatment of 1.5 to 2 months. Morbidity is extreme like xerostomia, dental caries, osteoradionecrosis, skin toxicities. Difficult to re-radiate once the radiation has been done. And it's not suitable for the lesions which are close to the bone because the chances of osteoradionecrosis becomes higher. And you are exhausting a modality which can be used as an adjuvant setting if the surgery upgrades the tumor, or otherwise if you want to use it for the second primary or the second tumors. So that's why the treatment of choice in early oral cancers is the surgical excision. When we talk about the advanced oral cancers, they generally warrant multimodality management. Advanced operable oral cancers, the combination of surgery followed by radiation therapy or without chemotherapy, that is the standard of treatment. So generally indications for radiation in advanced tumors is T3, T4 lesion, as we know, locally advanced tumors, and node positive in the neck. And chemo is added whenever there's margin positivity or perinodal extension is there. So there's a data which compares surgery followed by radiation vis-a-vis versus radiation alone as a primary treatment in oral cancers. As we know, the disease-specific survivals was so huge difference. These trials, some trials has to be stopped in between only before the completion. That's surgical, the disease survival was 62% versus vis-a-vis 12% in the chemoradiation arm. There are different approaches to the oral cancers. Early oral tumors, we can approach per orally, that is simple wide excisions can be done. But again, we have to remind ourselves of one thing, that's adequate resection. That means your margin should be adequate. So approach could be from outside or per oral, but your margin should be adequate, which we'll see in the subsequent slides also. Then other approaches to go to the oral cavity lesions. One is lower cheek flap raising, which is used in buccal mucosa tumors, lower GB sulcus, lower alveolus tumors, and it can be combined with the nodal dissection at the same time. Upper cheek flap, which is generally raised for upper alveolus, upper GB sulcus tumors, and the palatal tumors or the maxillary malignancies. Composite resections, a lot of time we use this composite resection or commando terms. That means the tumor is removed along with the adjoining bone, your skin, soft tissue, muscles, and the neck dissection at the same time. So these are few examples of composite resection where hemimandibulectomy has been done along with the neck dissection. So this is also known as commando or the composite resection in the normal layman terms. This is few examples where the surgery has been done for tongue lesion and reconstruction done with the radial artery forearm flap, primary tumor in the lip, locally reconstructed local rotation flap, then upper lip defect, which is closed by Abbé slender flap. So these are the different type of lesions and their vis-a-vis surgical plastic reconstruction. Then very important thing in oral cancer management when the surgery is being considered is the role of surgical margins. There are various criteria by Lowry and Strong, Bhadrasen's article from MSKCC, Batsaki's criteria, Spiro's and other. But what we have to remember is that pathological margin should be more than 5 millimeter at the end of the specimen, and you have to aim for a margin almost 1 centimeter because a shrinkage of tumor margin is seen in up to 1/3, that is up to 30%. And why this is important, why we are hell-bent on the margin-free status, because margin status impacts your local recurrences as well as your overall survival. So if it's a margin is negative, as you see in 18% local recurrence, while positive, these are few data from Lowry's and Johnson et al. So when the margin are positive, your local recurrence almost becomes double, which impacts your overall survival as well. Then comes the reconstruction of advanced oral cancers. And with the advent of microvascular reconstruction in last few years, things have changed very well to the benefit of the patient, where you can have extensive soft tissue defects and it can be very well reconstructed by using free flaps or microvascular reconstruction. So these are a few examples where microvascular reconstruction has not given us only the functional impact, but also the cosmetic improvement as compared to the traditional pedicle flaps. You can add quality of life also by integrating like primary osseointegrated implants in fibula, which gives the patient an option of having dentation also after the surgery, radiation, and later on for the better functional quality of life. And this impact of reconstruction is not only on the quality of life, but also on the oncological outcome. So various authors have studied comparison with the free flap versus the pedicle, and which has shown also that there is less chances of having a closed margin, which leads to a better local regional control and overall a better survival also. Maybe the reason for that, when the plastic reconstruction is available, you are not shy of taking closed margins, and the plastic unit is able to reconstruct whatever the big defect may be. Looking at then management of the neck, I'll not dwell much on this thing because the next talk by Dr. D'Cruz will be covering everything. So in node positive, generally there is a more consensus as compared to node negative, which also will be discussed in the subsequent lecture. So there is a huge shift from the radical to the conservative. So initially we started with radical neck dissections, which converted into comprehensive or the modified radical neck dissections, and which has converted into like selective neck dissection, which is also shows almost equal efficacy of therapeutic selective neck dissections in a lower nodal burden disease in oral cancers. So what is changing and what is new in the oral cancers and what is currently trending? So as we discussed the management of N0 neck, which we'll discuss in the subsequent lecture, new definition of resectability, which we'll talk about, and use of chemotherapy for borderline inoperable diseases, your metronomic and sentinel node biopsies. So neck dissection, I'll skip those slides. Neck dissection, as we know, the trifurcate incisions, we have shifted down to now horizontal incisions for even level 1 to 5 comprehensive neck dissections. Then the advent of retroauricular endoscopic assisted or the robotic assisted neck dissection has also come up. But we'll skip that for the next next lecture. Generally, looking at the treatment algorithm, if we see early stage, as we discussed, single modality treatment, surgery or radiation, with surgery being the preferable choice. And then comes advanced stage, where again stage 3, stage 4, divided into combined modality, surgery followed by radiation or chemoradiation is the preferable. And then comes another factor, which is the stage 4B, which we'll see into the next few slides. So that is the resectability. So when we looked at few years back, AJCC has criteria which defined as T4A tumors as resectable cancers, in oral cavity, T4B as unresectable tumors. Then came two seminal papers which looked into T4B, that is masticatory space involving oral cancers. And they found that below the mandibular notch, it is T4B oral cancers are almost similar results, local control, as compared to the T4A tumors. So that forced AJCC to change its definition to make T4B now very advanced tumor rather than an unresectable disease. So what was the problem with T4B? We know that upfront surgery was difficult because the difficulty in achieving a clear margin there because of very intricate anatomy at the skull base area. So it was a viable option, but to not explode fully. So it's like then ITF clearance, which is done in routinely in T4B or the masticator space tumors, which means the clearance of the infratemporal fossa, that is from the eustachian tube to laterally to the capsule of TM joint and superiorly to the greater wing of sphenoid. So you remove all the soft tissue, bone, and remnant muscles with pterygoid muscles and neurovascular bundle in this space to achieve good surgical margin. So we had our own paper from Bombay Hospital only, where we looked at the role outcomes of infratemporal fossa clearance for these T4B tumors, and we found that 2-year local regional control was almost 71%, which is, and 2-year local control was 71%, and 2-year local regional control was 65%, which when we compare T4B, it's almost comparable with the T4A lesions. Then what to do in the borderline or the unresectable disease? So role of induction chemotherapy, or what we call as a neoadjuvant chemotherapy in unresectable oral cancers. So there's a lot of data which has come up from Tata Memorial Hospital, and they have looked into technically unresectable tumors where they given induction chemotherapy and saw that how does it make a difference. The indications generally were when the disease was up to zygoma, surgically was deemed unresectable or borderline unresectable, extensive skin involvement, hyoid bone involvement, and extensive infratemporal fossa. And after chemotherapy, they found that almost like 40% of the disease could be made into a resectable disease. And this has translated into better survival also in those patients who received surgery as compared to the rest of the 60% who could not go for the surgical arm. So looking at these T4B categorically clearly, we divide into generally now is infra notch, that is below the mandibular notch. Surgical resection is advisable with adjuvant radiation or chemoradiation, and the results are comparable to T4A disease. So should be done surgical clearance for these. Second, intermediate or borderline. Here, whether you do neoadjuvant chemotherapy or surgery, that's the question. Still, compartmental resection or ITF clearance is a feasible option, but the data is small, so we need more refined criteria to define it well. So right now, NSATs are feasible to downstage the disease and then treat according to the extent of the response to the chemotherapy. And then third category, where the high supranotch or the pterygomaxillary fissure involvement disease, it has a very high local recurrences. So palliative treatment in the form of palliative RT or palliative chemotherapy, that is the only option available in these patients. Then comes one more thing which has recently been looked into, that is metronomic chemotherapy. So what exactly is metronomic chemotherapy? It's chronically equally spaced low doses of chemotherapy without any extended rest periods. The objective is to act as a low cost, safe and viable alternative to conventional induction chemotherapy. But this is mainly for your recurrent and metastatic locally advanced disease rather than operable oral cavity diseases. Though some studies has been done in operable oral cancers also, the response has been seen in good, and it's an economic therapy with non-toxic regimes and prevents the disease progression. But right now its indications are mostly for the recurrent and non-metastatic setting as compared to the standard care of chemotherapy. Then some changes which has happened in the radiation techniques also, that shift from the cobalt machines to the linear accelerators and new techniques like IMA-RT, IGRT or VMAT, which is aimed basically at parotid sparing, so that your morbidity of your xerostomia and your preservation of the normal structure is more as compared to previously, where the side effects and the morbidity of the radiation was very high. Then a little short note about chemotherapy. We will not dwell into the details here, but targeted chemotherapy, whether it's an era, yes, probably, because we'll see in future more precision-based oncological tailor-made therapies for the patients based on the gene signature. And the new kid on the block in that is the immunotherapy. Again, this is only for recurrent metastatic diseases, which is inoperable oral cancers. So generally immunotherapy works by blocking the tumor cells which deactivate the T cells. And this immunotherapy also can be used in combination with chemo, other chemotherapy agents or radiation therapy. A lot of trials are still going on. So the future, what does it hold in terms of oral cancer management? More, as we discussed, more personalized based medicine, and there will be there. Better identification of the risk groups and stratification of these risk groups, and the treatment modification can be made into that. A big example is, which I have not considered here because of the oropharyngeal, that is HPV, which is more common in the Western population as compared to our Indian data. Then better availability of the robotics, maybe its use of wider applications, especially in the oropharyngeal malignancies and based on tumors. And the better combination of multimodality, like again revisiting neoadjuvant chemotherapy, which followed by chemoradiation, or surgery for neoadjuvant followed by surgery and then radiation therapy. And then we discuss de-escalation of the therapy, that is in specific groups which are favorable risk groups like HPV positive patients, where de-escalation can be tried. There are various studies which are undergoing, some data has emerged also. But in the Indian population, it may not hold true because we don't have purely HPV positive patients as such. We have a lot of tobacco-induced malignancies and a lot of patients who is having a history of tobacco chewing also as a major important risk factor along with the HPV. But again, one thing which we have to understand and always remember, that most of the head and neck cancers, these oral cancers, they are preventable and curable if treated as early as possible in early stages. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ratna sir. It was a very precise and informative talk. Thank you so much for that. There are no questions in the box.
So basically, I think plastic surgery has evolved a lot to manage all these extensive cases.
Yeah.
So yeah. So now let's go to the next topic, to the cream talk by our esteemed professor, Dr. Anil De Cruz, my teacher and guide in Tata Hospital, president-elect of the UICC, and super consultant at Apollo and Bombay Hospital. Sir, we would like to listen to you on evolution of neck dissection.
Am I heard?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Am I heard?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Okay, and is my screen seen?
Yeah, screen is
Yes,
visible.
sir.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Satish, for these kind words. Though we stay in the same city, I think I'm seeing you after 10 years virtually. So some positives of COVID. Priya, thank you for chairing this session. Rajesh and the other office bearers, thank you for the opportunity to speak on evolution of neck dissection. Now, neck nodes, and I think both Rakesh and Kannan have very clearly said that they're very important. It's the single most important prognostic factor in head and neck cancer. The moment you have a node, however tiny it is, it decreases survival by 50%. The presence of nodes at once shifts the stage to stage 3. If it comes outside the node, extracapsular spread, there's a further 50% reduction in outcomes. So you must manage the neck, very, very important. I find a lot of people from the general surgery background and even oncologists who don't do specialty practice in head and neck sometimes give a lot of emphasis to the primary. They will do the best plastic reconstruction, but you don't treat the neck properly, you lose your patient. It's been an area very dear to my heart. I've done a lot of research over the last 30 years. I've just put up some of the publications that are now cited extensively. But I think the pride of place was to this publication, which is the first head and neck surgical publication in the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine, probably the first from the country in this paper in oncology, as well as it was given pride of place at the ASCO, which is probably the largest oncology gathering of 40,000. And it was given a plenary presentation. It's a very simple study. I'm not saying this to glorify myself, but I'm saying this to inspire youngsters who are listening to us today. And this study was very simple. We see these kind of tumors, small lesions, we can excise in the smaller setups with clear margins. But whether we do the neck or we don't do the neck is a matter of debate. These are clinically, radiologically node negative. Two schools of thought. One is wait and watch. If the patient gets a neck dissection, you operate. And the proponents of this theory said that you avoid surgery in 2/3 of patients, and there's no detriment to survival, no proven detriment. And there's another school of thought that says that you operate immediately, even if it's node negative. It's a one-stage procedure, minimal morbidity in expert hands, and you have better control and survival. So we did a very simple study. We screened 1281 patients, early oral cancers, N0. We randomized 596. When I analyzed, there were 500 patients that were ready for analysis. 243 had a neck dissection, 253 wait and watch. Now look what happened on disease-free survival. That means the relapse, the first relapse. Those that had an elective neck dissection had a 69.5% relapse rate, and those with a therapeutic or a wait and watch had a 45.9% survival. Sorry, not relapse rate, survival. The relapse rate is shown here, 81 in the elective neck dissection, 146 in the wait and watch. There was a detriment of 23.6% in the disease-free survival. Look at overall survival. 50 patients succumbed of their disease in the elective neck, 79 in the therapeutic or wait and watch, which translated to a difference of 12.5% in the overall survival. So doing the neck when it is clinico-radiologically negative, even for the smallest tumors, saves lives. It's now the standard of care. The first trial to give level 1 evidence. 1 death is prevented for every 8 patients treated with elective neck. And this comes from a 12.5 difference in the overall survival that I showed you, 80 to 67.5. And 1 recurrence is prevented for every 4 patients with elective neck. And this comes from the 23.6% difference in the disease-free survival. Subsequently, there has been another trial from the UK that was stopped prematurely when our trial was published and showed that even in the smallest tumors, there is a survival benefit if you did the neck in early node negative, clinico-radiologically node negative oral cancers. And then there have been 8 meta-analyses subsequent to that. So I'm telling everybody listening today that however small your primaries in the oral cavity, don't just excise the buccal mucosa and tongue and watch the neck. You'll lose 1 out of 8 patients. It's now become the standard of care, and it's features across most guidelines, the American guidelines, the European guidelines, and I also have pride of place on these committees by doing a very simple trial. And like I always show this favorite slide of mine, you put my name, D'Cruz, and neck. I have pride of place between the neckline of our famous actress called Ileana D'Cruz that shows her neckline. So there is some intangible benefits of doing simple research. You not only save life, but you get pride of place in places where you least expected it. But my main topic is evolution of the neck. And for the youngsters and others, for years we did the radical neck dissection. George Kreil first described it in 1906. The procedure was popularized by Hayes Martin in 1950. Basically, what they did was remove level 1, that's submandibular, upper deep cervical, mid deep cervical, lower posterior triangle, made everything bare, removed all nodes, the internal jugular, the nerve, and the muscle. The only thing that behind was the carotid, the vagus, the hypoglossal. Everything was removed. And this was standard of care for nearly a century. A seminal publication from Professor Shah in the early 90s, 1,119 radical neck dissections, 30 years. 33.3% of these were from micrometastasis, so basically occult disease. Look what happens if you do a radical neck dissection. You get what's known as a drooping shoulder syndrome, pain, limited movements, anatomic deformities, internal rotation of the humeral head, sternoclavicular joint atrophy and subluxation, atrophy of the trapezius. You can see the trapezius atrophied. Radical neck dissection is totally out. It's not only functional disfigurement, it also causes a lot of cosmetic disfigurement. So the radical neck, gradually there was a change, a paradigm shift in the 80s towards the 90s. And 3 large trials from the MD Anderson and the Memorial Sloan Kettering and from Europe, nearly 1,500 cases cumulatively, whether you did the radical neck dissection or a modified radical neck dissection where you saved structures, the 5-year survival and neck failure rate was similar. The statistical value was not significant. Modified neck dissection then from the early 90s became the standard of care, same control, less morbidity. What is a radical neck dissection? A modified neck dissection, you do exactly the same. Remove levels 1 to 5, but we preserve the jugular, we preserve the accessory, the spinal accessory, the jugular, and we preserve the sternocleidomastoid. You can see it in a different view here. But even if you did this, you still had some amount of shoulder dysfunction that varied from 5 to 40%, depending on who did the surgery, how you treated these structures. There was still some amount of dysfunction because of handling of this nerve. Of the 3 structures, the most important is the accessory nerve. It causes severe pain if you cut the accessory nerves of the neck, upper back, and occasionally the arm as these changes on the shoulder joint setting. There's diminished strength when performing regular daily activities. So if you operate on a lady, she can't put back the sugar bin up on the upper shelf. She can't raise her hands. And in a seminal paper by Schoen and Yardley, 46% of people had to change their occupation if you cut the accessory nerve. So my second message to you, that radical neck dissection is outdated. It's modified. You save three structures, the muscle, the vein, and the nerve. But the nerve is most important. And the nerve is at risk in the upper neck as well as the posterior triangle. And we'll see this as we go along. So here is the nerve coming out of the base of skull, intimately related with the jugular up. It comes through the sternocleidomastoid into the trapezius muscle, 5 centimeters above the clavicle. It's at risk in the upper neck when you raise the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid. Nodes above that are called 1, 2B. You dissect very aggressively at 2B, you will have impairment. So even if you do a modified neck dissection, 5 to 40% will have shoulder dysfunction. But it's more lethal at level 5 because it's a long, tortuous course. And I showed you in that photograph of the operative specimen. If I quickly go back, look at the accessory nerve in the posterior triangle. It's long and tortuous. You handle it tremendously and you have problems. So do we need to clear 2B? Do we need to clear 5? And here is a very simple, another study that we did together. Dr. Gauri, who's one of our faculty, led this study. I was happy to be part of it. We looked at 583 neck dissection in 470 patients. All we did is we dissected the nodes and sent it in separate packets, and you can see how we did it. So all of you all do studies, do operations, but few do studies. And look how simple this second study is. My randomized trial was very simple. Here's a second simple study for you all to have some stimulus to do research even out in the private practice. So there were an equal number of tongue and buccal mucosa, nearly about 35% in both. There was an equal number of early T1 to T3 and T4 disease. There was more or less an equal number of N0 and N+. So it was a balanced study of 583. Lymph node metastasis in oral cancer are concentrated in level 1 to 3. For those of you all not familiar with level 1 to 3, it's above the supraomohyoid, submandibular, upper deep cervical, and mid deep cervical. Only 3.8% had at level 2B. Only 3.3% had at level 5. Remember what I told you, operating on 2B and 5 causes spinal nerve dysfunction. Look at the low incidence of level 2B and 5. Could we save these nodes? In which patients is the 3.8% and the 3.3%? So here is the multivariate analysis of this study. Level 5 only involved in buccal and retromolar area if level 2A is positive. So remember, the jugulo-digastric node is very important when you operate. If you have a node at 2A, at the carotid bulb, and it's a buccal or retromolar, the chances of 2B and 5 are very high. Exactly the same with 2B. It's mainly seen in tongue cancers when 2A is involved. So again, to put it simply, look at the jugulo-digastric node when you operate. It doesn't have to be on frozen, crossly positive. If it's a buccal retromolar, there's a chance that 5 is involved, then only do level 5. If it's tongue and 2A is involved, then do 2B. Otherwise, save 2B and 5, and you will have less spinal dysfunction. Even if you do 2B, don't be aggressive pulling on the nerve to cause dysfunction. Prospective study from Taiwan showing in a prospective that a supraomohyoid level 1, 2, and 3 shows the same neck control rates and disease-specific survival with fewer complications in a node negative lesion, and meta-analysis looking at the clinically node positive in oral squamous cell cancer, 5 studies looking at ipsilateral, contralateral, and overall neck recurrence, exactly the disease specific death rate and the overall death rate or overall survival. So even in node positive, we are shifting away from modified neck to supraomohyoid. Here's a collation of all data with the PRISMA systematic review and meta-analysis that even if you have node positive but small volume, node positive level 1, that's CN1 less than 3 centimeters, CN2 which are not fixed, N2 is 3 to 6 centimeters, absence of palpable metastasis at low levels or multiple levels, you can do a supraomohyoid. So we've shifted from radical to modified radical. We saved the 3 structures and now we are shifting just to a selective neck SOHD even in small volume node positive patients. So selective neck dissection, which used to be a staging procedure, is now being done in small volume node positive. This is an adequate clearance in a patient who's node positive. This was a tongue case, so I've done level 2B, which is supraspinal neck nodes, as I'm demonstrating with my cursor. If it was a buccal, I probably would not have been so aggressive in this area. So this will preserve my nerve function and less function and cosmetic deformity with equal control rates. Remember that even if you do an SOHD, patients still have nerve dysfunction. You have to prevent it, avoid the cautery, avoid excessive traction and handling on the nerve. It's the rapid tugs which are worse than steady, slow handling. Don't ask your assistant to pull with a vein loop or a retractor on the accessory. Prevent surgical damage by good knowledge of anatomy and start your patients on early physiotherapy. When I was at Tata's, my general ward patients had lower shoulder dysfunction because they were all manual laborers. They would get back and do physiotherapy by doing their work. But it's the private and deluxe room patients who keep their hand very stiff and don't get back shoulder function. So initiate physiotherapy quickly. So we went from radical, we came to modified, we've now come to supraomohyoid. Is there a role for still less sentinel node biopsy? So the same patient I showed you, early oral cancer, widely excised, could we do a sentinel node biopsy? It's hot in breast, in melanoma. 2 randomized trials, both published in the last 6 months. Literature is replete with lot of trials, but they're just 2 randomized trials. One is the French trial, which is on top. It's called the Gerald trial. And there's a Hasegawa trial, which is a Japanese trial, both published in the Journal of Clinical Oncology, a high impact journal. 44 is the impact factor. So it makes sense. What's the important conclusion of these trials? Both trials showed that for the N0 neck, there's non-inferiority, means it's safe. It's equivalent to do a supraomohyoid. Both trials showed that there's better shoulder function with the sentinel node biopsy because you handle the accessory less. But the shoulder function seemed to improve over time and was more or less similar whether you did the elective neck or you did the SNB at the end of 1 year. So it's non-inferior. You get some benefit for the first 12 months, but it evens out at the end of 12 months. Now, what's the current status then? The sentinel node biopsy is equivalent to neck dissection, but the learning curve is steep. It costs much more. It's a cumbersome procedure. You need a nuclear setup. You need dye. You need serial step sectioning. You need immunohistochemistry. A third of patients need to come back to the operating rooms if sentinel node biopsy comes positive later. And the morbidity is not as severe as in breast, where you have severe lymphedema of the arm, melanoma, where you have a severe lymphedema of the arm or the leg. Shoulder dysfunction returns to normal equivalent at the end of 12 months. That's why it's not gained popularity. Here is a large trial looking 8,000 odd patients in the US with a median follow-up of 35.4%, led by a group that came out of Pittsburgh. Sentinel node biopsy did reduce preoperative morbidity and hospital stay. You could avoid complications in nearly 2/3 of patients. Despite these attributes, it was rarely used in the United States. Less than 3% of the cohort had the sentinel node biopsy. In our country, as Rakesh said, 1/3 of our patients are head and neck. For us, in already stretched setups, in setups where our patients don't have enough funding to do a sentinel node biopsy, which has some improvement in function only for 12 months, needs more studies and more robust data to make it frontline. But those of you all who want to practice it, it's okay. It's safe. But whether it will come as standard of care, I'm not sure, given the limitations that I've highlighted. It's not only smaller surgery. Sometimes we do extended neck dissection. Extended neck dissection involves removal of additional lymph node groups or non-lymphatic structures not removed in an R&D. Case in point, I'm removing the external carotid in this patient. Case in point, I'm going for a lateral retropharyngeal node, which is now called an extended neck dissection. So you can do these procedures in a select group of patients, but never remove the common carotid or the internal carotid. It's bad to do. Neurological morbidity is up to 50%. 1/3 of your patients will die and nearly 50% will recur within a year. So we will take out the external carotid if required, but never the internal carotid artery. I'm going to end with a few practical issues because I know most of you all are general surgeons, and a few practical issues from points that I've gleaned over the years in practice. Never do a neck node biopsy. I think Kannan made this point in his unknown primary. FNAC is accurate. It has a 90% accuracy. Doing a neck node biopsy delays, hampers, and compromises definite treatment. You're cutting into a node if you do a wedge. You're making an intracapsular disease extracapsular. I told you survival drops by 50%. It's only to be done in infections, tuberculosis, lymphomas, or when there's an ambiguous diagnosis and your pathologist wants more disease. For those of you all who are forced to do an open biopsy, please cite the scar in a transverse skin crease. God forbid this comes as malignancy. I can excise the scar in my subsequent surgery and then decrease. But if you place your scar vertically along the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid or too high or too low, then to excise the scar, I'll have to take 2-3 incisions to clear the entire neck, which is not good. But open biopsy is really gone because we can now do core biopsy. Case in point, 50-year-old male presented with bilateral node involvement. We couldn't find a primary site. Triple scopy was normal. FNAC was suggestive of a lymphoma. And you can see these slide, round blue cells that you can see. Core biopsy done. We did immunohistochemistry, CK positive, LCA negative. We know it's a metastatic nasopharyngeal cancer, treated the patient differently. So always when you have a doubt, a good core biopsy and good immunohistochemistry. So those of you all working in smaller setup, it's not that you're doing wrong, but take the trouble. It costs another 5,000-10,000 rupees more. There's a whole load of immunochemistry markers which can guide you to where the primary is. You have germ, you'll get certain markers positive. You have a melanoma, it's positive. Now a germ cell patient need not have a radical neck dissection or a full neck dissection. A round cell tumor may just need to have chemoradiotherapy. A sarcoma needs aggressive surgery. So please, core biopsy and immunohistochemistry is the way to go. The third practical issue, how do you image the neck? I've put 5 meta-analyses up. Each one of them will show you that there's no superiority of imaging the neck by any modality, whether it's MR, whether it's CT, whether it's ultrasound, whether it's an FDG PET. As I would say in Hindi, 19-20 ka farak hai. So decide on what you want to use for imaging the primary. If you're doing a CT, image the neck. If you're doing a MR for tongue, image the neck with the MR. There's some data showing that the diffusion weighted images are superior to conventional imaging in case of MRI for neck nodes, but it's not standard of care. So the choice of imaging is dictated by the choice of investigation for the primary. One important point, the carotid resectability, which is probably the only thing that keeps us away from operating the neck, is very important. And you look at the angle of abutment, you can see the carotid here, the node is on this side. If you have less than 180 degrees circumferential involvement, the case is probably operable. 80 to 170 degrees, it's borderline operable. You may want to do a trial resection if other parameters are favorable. More than 270, it's inoperable. Don't operate the patient, give radiotherapy and do neck as a salvage. So generally the dictum is less than 180 degrees circumferential involvement of the carotid. You don't, you operate more than 180, you don't operate your patients. As Kannan said, for imaging, the PET scan is the investigation of choice in the unknown primary. Conventional imaging, you can barely see the primary in the base of tongue. And here anybody would tell you, even the ward boy who brings in the packet of PET tell you, sir, base tongue mein lesion hai. You can see the big light up and you can see the small primary in the base of tongue and you know what you're treating. I'm ending with neck nodes and thyroid because it's important. A thyroid is a lymphatic rich organ, but remember neck nodes are more common in papillary and medullary, up to 50%, less in Hürthle and follicular. The prognostic significance is debatable in differentiated thyroid. So doing an aggressive dissection does not save lives. And remember that the first echelon of nodal spread is the central compartment. And you can see the two parathyroids that I'm showing you, one here and 1 year, that have been saved with its full vascularity, but the entire neck central compartment is nice and clean. You can see the recurrent laryngeal nerve going here, trachea bare. So whenever you'll treat thyroid and neck, the neck to be treated if only clinico-radiologically involved. Central compartment can have a limited exploration. There is no role for prophylactic nodal dissection. So don't try to do full central compartment, screw up the parathyroids, open the lateral neck when there's no nodes. It does not have an impact on survival. And lastly, there's no role of berry picking. Berry picking means picking up few nodes, high rate of recurrence, nearly 50% will recur. Even if you have nodes and you operate the patient meticulously, multiple nodes, 20% recur. So remember, thyroid is lymphatic rich, node positive, meticulous dissection. Node negative, don't need to do anything. Operate the thyroid, get out, you're safe. Don't give your patient parathyroid insufficiency. So I'm going to end with the evolution and what the role of neck dissection is today. Modified and selective neck dissection has replaced R&D in the treatment of neck disease. Generally, MND for large volume node positive and SND, that's supraomohyoid for the rest. The role of the sentinel node biopsy is evolving, and I've showed you two randomized trials. There's no role for compromised surgery and residual disease. Do an R&D if the structures are involved. Do an extended R&D and take off the external carotid if it's involved. Don't tell the patient ki humne 99% nikala, 1% left behind. That's disastrous. You must get an R0. And thyroid is treated differently from squamous cell carcinoma. So thank you very much. These are my coordinates, my email. Any of you all want to ask me questions offline, I'll be delighted to answer. And Rajesh and the rest of the group, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a wonderful and good experience. I would like the chairpersons to take over.
I think sir has covered everything absolutely meticulously. There are no questions left to ask. There are no questions in the chat box and all. So from my days when you used to do a big cryle incision and remove everything, the shoulder going down, now coming to a simple, beautiful MND, and maybe like Rakesh said, the future robotic dissection with no scars at all for the neck nodes. So I think that is the next evolution in neck. Sir, what do you think about that?
So I know there's a lot of data coming out in robotic, but it's like saying that if I can go from Navi Mumbai to Thane to visit you, and if I can go in a simple Maruti or a Honda and get there in the same time, why drive a Cadillac? In our places, patients have affordability as a problem. Robotic jacks up the price a lot. It does not add to radicality, it only adds to cosmesis. You're removing the jaw of someone, or you're doing, if it's a very small tongue lesion, patient is very cosmetically conscious, I would probably then offer them a robotic. But for 90% of my patients who are going to have a lip drooping, and you see patients, I see so many notes done by people, they'll say robotic, but the lip is atrophying because the marginal mandible is gone. So I wonder where the cosmesis is. When they smile, the lip droops. So if it's a very small lesion, cosmetically a patient who demands, maybe robotic has a thing, but be balanced. It's not something that you have to do. It will evolve with time. In my book, it won't become standard of care. Some patients will demand it and you may want to do it. The youngsters don't look happy. Kannan's doing all robotically. If you give Kannan a chance, he'll do the neck transrectally. He won't even give a scar on the neck. Am I
Not at
correct?
all, sir. Not at all, sir. No
Oh,
neck dissection with robotic.
okay.
I think
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Priya.
In fact, I must congratulate you all again to have 60 people listening at 10:30 evening on Friday evening. It's very creditable to the society. So thank you for having us.
We are very
Normally we
fortunate to have
around
you here, sir.
120-140 people being there, you know. It's
Okay.
mainly cancer topic. That's why general surgeons, especially the general surgeons, are not too interested, it looks like, in the head and neck. Otherwise, we have got 140-150 people coming up there.
Yeah, I guess for the general surgeons, maybe if we had not done everything on head and neck, done one breast, one something, one stomach, and one head and neck, it may have attracted more people. But I always say, I've been teaching for years, I don't mind lecturing to 5 people if they are going to listen rather than see 140. So I know Satish listened, at least he sounded like he was listening. And so also Priya. So I'm happy, even if there were 2, I'm okay. Rakesh
We used to
and
attend your
Kannan,
clinic
no.
at Tata Hospital.
Sir, there are senior people like Sudip Sarkar and Dr. Begani, all those people logged into here to you. So
Okay, thank you.
Maybe it's a poor man's disease. That's why less number of people today. The head and neck.
Anyway, it's a pleasure.
yeah.
thank you,
Thanks,
sir.
Rajesh.
Thank you for obliging us to talk at a short notice. And even you are out of the town, you are in Delhi, I'm told, and you
Yes,
did
sir.
manage to log in. So thank you so much, sir. Thank
Pleasure.
you, Kanan and Satish, Rakesh, Priya, all of you. Thank you very much. Rajesh, you can conclude.
Thank you, all the chairpersons and the speakers. We had a wonderful session today. This was our 12th series in a lecture series, and we'll be moving on for the 13th in next Friday. We'll be starting on esophagus, and esophagus followed by then stomach and liver. So thank you, Juventus, for supporting us in this endeavor. I'll ask
Rajesh
Dr.
to talk
Niranjan to
about,
conclude.
okay, I don't mind it. So friends, this Sunday, as a part of celebrations for the Doctors' Day, which happened yesterday, we are bringing you a program called Healing the Healers. It will be a 9 to 1 program with many topics, general, basically no general surgery topic, but general topic to medical professionals. So there are people like Dr. Sanjay Yog, Dr. Amdekar, then we have got Dr. Utture, Dr. Jayalal from IMA. All these big wigs are going to be with us. Dr. Lalit Kapoor from AMC. They are going to deliberate. Dr. Palanivelu would be also there. So please be with us at 9 o'clock on Sunday for the webinar Healing the Healers. We have been sending the flyers and the brochures on your WhatsApp. And you can also go to the Mumbai Surgical Society website or the Association of Colon and Rectal Society website, because it's a joint program of both the society. And in case you have not received the brochure, you can download it from there, and it's just free registration. You don't have to pay anything. Just click it and join with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Good night, sir. Good night, madam.
Good night. Thank you.